including information that led us to today's search of the storage locker in New Hampshire. This is what we learned during this multi-jurisdictional investigation. Neves Valente studied at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island on an F-1 visa around 2000 to 2021. He eventually obtained legal permanent resident status. Previously, he attended the same academic program as the MIT professor Nuno Loureiro in Portugal between 1995 and 2000. Although Neves Valente appeared to reside in Florida, between November 26 and November 30 of this year, he rented a hotel room in Boston. On December 1st, he rented a gray Nissan Sentra with Florida plates from a car rental agency in Boston. That same day, he drove to the vicinity of Brown University, where his car was observed intermittently between December 1st and December 12th. On December 13th, Neves Valente entered an auditorium on Brown University's campus during a study session and began shooting at students, killing Ella Cook and Mohammed Aziz Umarzokov, and injuring 9 others. Between December 13th and December 14th, Neves Valente returned to Massachusetts. On December 15th, he murdered MIT professor Nuno Loureiro at Loureiro's home in Brookline, Massachusetts. At some point while he was in Massachusetts, he switched the plates on the Nissan Sentra to an unregistered plate out of Maine. Immediately following Professor Loureiro's murder, Neves Valente drove to a storage facility in Salem, New Hampshire, where he had rented a storage unit in November of this year. Since the December 13th shootings at Brown and the December 15th shooting in Brookline, state, local, and federal law enforcement officials have been working hand in hand around the clock to identify the shooter and prevent him from inflicting further harm. I have said this before and will continue to believe when law enforcement agencies work together, crimes are solved and the public is protected. The information we provided to you tonight would not be possible without the dedicated men and women of law enforcement in multiple districts throughout New England, including the FBI, ATF, HSI, the U.S. Marshal Service, Massachusetts State Police, Rhode Island State Police, Providence Police, Brookline Police, and the Brown University Police. In addition, prosecutors for the Rhode Island Attorney General's Office and the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office, and federal prosecutors from Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts all contributed to this result. I also want to thank Attorney General Pam Bondi for her support in coordinating the federal response.
Questions?
Can you tell us anything about his motive and the 2 sets of victims and how they might be related and how he might be related to them?
That is not information that we can share right now, but as soon as that information becomes available, we will share that with the public.
Are you able to say anything of what led you to link the 2 crimes, perhaps initially?
Can you repeat the question so we can hear you well?
Yes, the question was how were we able to link him to the 2 crimes? So investigators identified the vehicle that he had rented in Boston and then drove to Rhode Island. And he was seen, the vehicle was seen outside of Brown, and there was security footage that showed a person who resembled him. There was financial investigations that were going on in the background that linked him not only to that car, but also to the hotels that he had rented and the car that he had used to not only drive to Rhode Island, but then back to Boston. And then there was the security footage that captured him within a half mile of the professor's residence in Brookline. And there is a video footage of him entering an apartment building in the location of the professor's apartment. And then later that evening, he is seen about an hour later entering the storage unit wearing the same clothes that he had been seen wearing right after the murder.
So you have an extensive video canvas as part of this investigation that leaves you no doubt.
This is the evidence we have right now. We are coming to you tonight because the federal complaint was unsealed, and we wanted to provide you with the information and to assure the public that law enforcement collectively believe that we have the person, that we identified the person, and that person is dead, and that he was the person responsible not only for the Brown shootings, but for the Brookline shooting.
Can you speak to, before the self-inflicted gunshot, was there any interaction between law enforcement and Meadows Valente? Like, any words exchanged or anything like that?
No, when investigators went into the storage facility tonight to execute the federal search warrant, he was dead.
Do you think he entered there this evening?
No.
He entered an hour after what happened in Brookline.
Yes.
And do you know how long that storage, did he rent that? Like, how long?
Our understanding from the financial investigation is that he had rented a storage facility at the location in Salem, New Hampshire in November.
Can you confirm whether or not he used the same weapon in the Brown shooting as he did in the MIT shooting?
Ballistics investigation was ongoing and has not been completed at this time, so we're not going to comment on that.
Can you give us any sense of when you started to recognize perhaps that, he was the same person? I know it was through a video, but when it sort of dawned on investigators that these two cases were related?
It was in the last 24 to 48 hours that my understanding, according to my understanding, is when the link began to be established. And that was mainly, he was using a phone that was obfuscating ability to track it. And he was using financial, not credit cards that were tied to his name. And so he was sophisticated in hiding his tracks.
According to the complaint that was unsealed, it says that Meadows Valente and the MIT professor had attended the same academic program together in Portugal from 1995 to 2000. Do you know if they knew each other? Or
My understanding is that they did know each other.
Have they been in communication since that last date?
I don't have any information to provide you.
Would you call this targeted?
We're still investigating the motive in this case and trying to, because, like I said, he was very careful in his communications, and we just don't have any information right now to answer that question. But when we get that information, we will share it.
Was there anything else in the storage locker?
The storage locker in which his body was found, my information is that no.
Was that satchel in the storage?
Yes.
locker? What was in it?
Can you repeat the question? I can't hear you online.
So the question was there anything else in the storage unit aside from the defendant's body? And the answer is he was found in there with his satchel. There was nothing else found in there that I am aware of, but they're still in the process of searching that facility right now.
Did he kill himself right away?
We don't have any information when he killed himself, but he was dead when investigators found his body.
Can you tell us anything about his life? Like, I think you said the last known address was in Florida. Like, what he was doing? Was he working? Was he in the field of physics, which he had studied? Any sort of biographical stuff you can tell us about him?
Because his identity was only become aware to us in the last 24 hours, I can't provide you with any of that information right now, but I'm sure once we have a full understanding of what he has been doing, where he has been, aside from the time when he entered into New England in November, we will provide that information.
Besides the MIT professor, did he know any of the victims at Brown University personally?
We have no information that he knew any of the victims or anyone who was at that auditorium on the night that he went in and killed.
Have you been able to find anything about when he did attend Brown, whether there were any issues? He was there briefly. Was he kicked out? Do you know?
That information hasn't been provided to us yet.
Given what you see on the video of the MIT professor's home, is there any doubt that he was the intended target of the killing?
The information that I know, and again, the investigations are going to continue to be able to provide you with all the answers that you are asking, is that there was no doubt that he was the intended target.
What was inside that satchel?
That is information that is still being, the investigators are still on the scene right now conducting that investigation, and we haven't received information as to what was in the satchel.
Was there any suicide note?
No information right now.
How about in terms of the charges themselves? I mean, there was a crime in Rhode Island and also the 1 year. How does that sort of get sorted out? How does it get charged, et cetera?
So there are state crimes, including the murders, and then there are the federal crimes, which is one that we brought tonight. The jurisdictions are working together, and we have been sharing information together and encouraging everyone to share information that could result in solving the crimes that were committed in their jurisdictions. And we will continue to do that if there are any doubts that are left with closing out those investigations. We will continue to share all the information so that we can share with you whatever motivations come to light as to why these heinous crimes were committed.
Are you confident, I guess maybe that's not the right word, but do you believe that he acted alone, or is there any evidence that anyone else was traveling with him when he came here?
We have no information that he was acting in concert with anyone else right now.
Anything interesting found in the car?
That search is still underway, but we will provide you again with more information as soon as we get it.
Anything more you can tell us about, you said he hid his own tracks. Can you talk about that a little bit, what he did?
So he was using an application on his phone, and there have been a couple things. The Google phone doesn't allow officers to ping the direct location and get real-time location information about the phone. There was also beliefs that he was using SIM cards that were possibly European SIM cards that are carried through a provider in the United States but does not provide real-time information about tower connections.
In the car?
The vehicle, he rented, we have video of him renting the car at Enterprise here in Boston.
And the fake plate from Maine was just...
We haven't figured out now where he got that plate from. It was an unregistered plate in Maine. We have information that that plate was a very old plate that had been taken out of the registration status over a decade ago.
When his body was found, can you just describe what he was surrounded by? Can you just paint the picture as to what was in that unit?
What I can say is he rented one unit. His body was found in a unit that was not occupied, and there was nothing else in there from what I have heard, but this is information that I was getting an hour or two ago from agents who were conducting the searches there. When we get further information, the information will be made public, including in the returns for the search warrant that we obtained this evening.
Was he living in it effectively since after the Brookline incident?
I have no information right now as to the unit that he had actually rented. The tactical teams were there to search, and they were obviously concerned that there could be booby traps or other types of security issues. And so when they noticed that that storage unit was still locked from the outside, it was clear that he couldn't be inside. And so they started searching the abandoned or the non-occupied units with the approval of the management, and that is when they found the body right next door.
I know that you haven't had much time. Does he have any sort of criminal record that you know of at this point in time?
We are not aware of any criminal record in the United States.
Do you have any information about his life in Florida? What he did, where he lived?
My understanding, it was South Florida. I know that they know the address, but nothing has been made public about that yet, and I'm assuming that there will be searches.
Profession, anything, what he did down there?
I have no information.
And just to be clear, did he fly up from Florida for this, do you think? Did he travel from Florida?
Again, the motive, and we have information of his being in New England throughout 2025, but once we get the information about why he came up here, what drove him to be up here, we will share that with the public.
Any information on how long he had been a lawful permanent resident of the U.S.?
I don't have that information.
Well, I mean, the only two ties that you have or can talk about now is he went to Brown and he went to this graduate school with the professor in Portugal. I mean, those are the only two ties that you can talk about now in terms of their relationship.
That is correct right now.
Is it graduate school or undergrad?
Yeah, whatever it was, I'm sure it's in the.
They were in school.
Jeff, you have a question?
Do you know if he was in contact with anybody either immediately before coming to New England or after he got here?
That is not information that we have to share right now.
Just one more?
Do you know, did he have any contact with anybody else, besides, the rental, the hotel, in his travels?
That is information that I don't have to share with you right now.
There's one question
Yep, go ahead.
question. Is there, there was been some reports on social media by this, saying that a man who was homeless and was sort of living at Brown was the one who sort of saw him and thought he was suspicious and took his plate number and then was urged by other people on Reddit to make sure he reported it. Is that true? You say there was a witness, but is that his account true, that he's the one that helped break this, or gave a crucial tip? How would you describe that?
We did receive information from a witness who encountered him after the Brown shooting and gave information that was very helpful to the investigation and in identifying Neves Valente.
You're gonna get the 50,000?
We'll let you know.
Say about
The accounts that are on the record right now is what we can comment on, but we will provide, again, more information so that the public
Okay,
will
all right.
have
Thank you, guys.
confidence in our investigations.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.